The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
We're meeting at a moment when we are seeing this new political cycle about to emerge here in Brussels. And we have seen in the wake of the vote for the European parliamentary elections that there's a clear shift here toward the right. How do you think that is likely to impact competition policy itself?
Well, first and foremost, the shift to the right was not at all as much as many feared. I was kind of saying, no, well, the centrist pro-European parties, they haven't even begun campaigning yet when everybody said, oh, it will be an avalanche. And we still have a pretty solid, stable, centrist coalition, all pro-European. And I think that is good news because we are living in a world where things are really troublesome. So you need stability in leadership. You need to be able to get things done. And I think there will come a lot of changes in the next mandates. But I don't think that they will give up on competition because competition is a very important driver to be able to deliver to citizens. And if you want to give an incentive or a subsidy also for businesses to make the most of that, they need to know that there is competition for it. Because otherwise, you know, we will not be competitive without competition.
But it feels from the outside, when looking at what's happening here, that competition policy itself is a bit at a crossroads, in the sense that we are hearing increasingly this need for more strategic autonomy out of the bloc. And at the same time, competition rules are so developed here, so entrenched in the way that things are done. Do you expect any sort of overhaul, reform of the competition rule book in the next 5 years?
Well, it is a bit of a paradox because if we look at what we consider sort of our global competitors, China and the US, they enforce competition and they focus on competition as one of the drivers to make them more competitive. And I think it's really important to take note of that their competitiveness have not come from giving up on competition. That has come by, you know, focusing on competition. The Biden administration have done that in three different sequences, both with the new leadership of the DOJ and the FTC, then on the first package for competition measures, and then the third package for competition measures. And I think it's important to also learn from that competition is part of the solution. You're more resilient if companies have suppliers to choose from. You're more resilient if you have customers to serve. If one customer fails you, you have others instead. So I think we have a very important discussion ahead of us. And so far, you know, for instance, our merger rules, they have shown to be sufficiently flexible. We can recognize, you know, digital competition, potential competition, competition in innovation, which is a really, really important issue. The Illumina Grail case is a good illustration of that. And the state aid rules, they have both been updated, but they are also shown that they are really sufficiently adaptable when we are in a very critical situation.
The reason why I'm asking you is because I get to be in this privileged position, right? I hear from the business community, but also from the policymakers. And I'll just pick this example. There are several, but there's a recent example of a potential banking merger in Spain that didn't go ahead because authorities said it was not going to be good for consumers. And then I hear people such as Enrico Letta here in Brussels telling me that what we need is a stronger banking system, bigger banks that can compete with those in the United States. So how do you square this circle?
But this is actually not an impossible equation, because what we need is to have more single market. For 10 years, we have been talking about a capital single market. The legislation is in place, 2 consecutive action plans, all fulfilled. What we need is for member states actually to implement. If you look at the telco sector, more or less the same thing. We have national market, national regulators, national rules that has grown up for national market to become walled gardens. We need single markets. If we have scale, in the market, we can also have scale in the businesses. And I have been listening to and participating in discussions about competitiveness for a very long time now. I have seen no progress on creating that capital market that will serve European businesses. We are less than half than the US market in equity, in bonds, and in venture capital. And that is only because of resistance to integrate and to have one internal market also for capital.
So that resistance is coming from the member state level?
Yes.
And that's what you would like to see change going forward?
That is why I want to see change, because if you want to push for competitiveness, you also need to push for what makes that happen.
Right. Some states, though, some governments would argue that what they need is more leeway to provide subsidies. And you mentioned China, you mentioned the United States, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. The EV tariffs show that there's a clear concern here about subsidies given by Chinese authorities, too. Is there room here for European governments to step up the level of subsidies so then European companies have a more level playing field when you look at it from a global perspective?
Well, two perspectives on that. First, we've become much better to defending ourselves against unfair competition, both with the trade defense mechanisms, the border adjustment mechanism, with the foreign subsidies regulation. But I think that the point is to realize that we can never outspend China or the US. We can spend strategically. We now have 10 of these important projects that have a common European interest. In total, in hydrogen, batteries, microelectronics, cloud, health, it's an investment in cutting-edge innovation of 100 billion euros. And that, I think, is a strategic way of using taxpayers' money, crowding in private capital, in order to get what the market will not otherwise deliver. Instead of thinking of copying, I think it's important to find strategic ways of doing what we cannot otherwise get, and then, of course, enhance the European model, because the European model has been so successful. You know, we're actually delivering to our citizens. This is one of the few unions, whatever you call it, on the planet that delivers to citizens.
And to conclude on this topic, though, there's several people raising concerns about the potential likelihood that the EU over the years will continue to fall behind against China, against the US. Ultimately, do you share this concern? Because it seems that in Europe, consumers have a choice, but they might not have the jobs.
But we have the highest employment that we have had, I think, for I don't know how long. And for instance, I think it's important for people to realize that it's not, for instance, AI that will take your job. It's the other person educated to manage AI that might take your job. And one of the things that Europe is good at is actually making sure that people can use their talent, get wiser over their lifetime. The Recovery and Resilience Plan in total has set aside 18 billion euros
True.
for just basic digital education. So my point is to say, let's not get distracted by what they are doing in the US and in China. Let's stick to our guns and make sure that it actually works.
So be strategic.
Be strategic and be European.
Right. Let's talk about some of the ongoing work that your team is carrying at the moment. One of the open investigations is related to Microsoft and Teams. I know you can't give us precise details of ongoing work, but could you perhaps tell us whether this is likely to be concluded before the end of the mandate?
Well, that is very difficult. You know, timelines are always difficult, but it's interesting because actually there are many who deliver sort of tools for you to work remotely, to have meetings with other people. And these tools, they have different properties, they come from different businesses. And it's really important that we keep having competition so that we keep innovating on how these tools work. Actually, I think a lot of people were a bit disappointed during the pandemic. Is this it? When we work remotely, because working remotely will be part of our working life. So we need competition, we need innovation in how we work. And this is why it is important that you can multi-home, as they say, that you can integrate different products and do that seamlessly.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give to someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters, and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
However, Microsoft seems to have already taken a couple of steps. They have announced that not just for Europe, but globally, they're going to be unbundling teams from the rest of Office. Is this step likely to be enough to avoid antitrust charges?
Well, on that I cannot comment. Of course, unbundling is important because unbundling is what gives you choice to put something else into your suite of working tools, and the seamlessness that the APIs actually work together also crucial. What we will conclude, I cannot say yet.
However, Microsoft seems to be suggesting that they're willing to go further. So does that suggest that can you just at least outline whether you are having constant or regular conversations with Microsoft on this matter, on this investigation?
Well, we always have conversations with the parties, but of course it's important if we settle a competition issue, it needs to be effective and it needs to be fast.
I also want to look at AI. I know there's also quite a lot of work ongoing on this front. You're also looking at some investments actually from Microsoft in the space with OpenAI in particular. There, the issue is more around whether it's following merger rules or not. Any update on that front, actually?
Well, we hope to get a bit more information that we have asked for some of the internal documents in order to assess whether there's been a change of control. This is basically what we're looking at. And then, of course, with colleagues in other jurisdictions, we're also talking about whether we should see these different ways of organizing as a way of evading merger control. So far, we have no conclusions, but I think there is sort of a global watch out for what this may be, because it is important to be able to assess who's controlling what, because the AI tech race is not over yet. It has only begun. So it's really important that we do not get entrenchment of AI and big tech as we know it, but making sure that many can participate in the development of different types of AI, because we have so many use cases. So we do not just need a few large language models. Actually, we need a competing landscape.
Looking at some of the work you've done over the last 10 years and looking at what's happening now on AI, it's very clear that the players you have been looking at, the big tech, are the same companies that are now in this AI race. Ultimately, is this the next challenge for competition policy? Do you need to pay even more attention now to generative AI?
Well, I think we need to focus even more on speed. And here, of course, it's really great that we got the Digital Markets Act. Because the core platform services that we're looking at, if they get hypercharged by AI, of course, this is something that we need to look at. How will that work? How will the ban of self-preferencing work if you put AI into your own services if others hadn't done that yet? So I think new questions will arise, but with the Digital Markets Act, actually, we have a very good tool to look at that.
It's interesting you bring up the Digital Markets Act and at the same time VSA, the Digital Services Act. These are no doubt two big pieces of legislation that have marked the second mandate of competition policy. However, some policy experts are making the comment that yes, it was a good step, but it's not creating change. It's not leading the big tech to actually alter their behavior. What would be your response?
Well, Compliance Day was 7th of March. And even though things are happening very fast, this is very recent. We now have 5 cases. We have more in the pipeline. And what I see is that with the Digital Markets Act, we get closer and closer to the business model. The changes that the DMA is demanding, they are changes that will touch the business model.
Breakups even.
well, remains to be seen, but if you have to carry a second app store, well, of course, that will make a dent in your own app store. If you cannot promote your own services, but need to give room for competitors, rightfully, legitimately so, of course, that will potentially take away some of your own profits. So, of course, this will be a very difficult enforcement task, but even so much more rewarding, because the potential for the competitors of big tech, they are really, really big. And this is why the enforcement of the DMA, of course, is a top priority.
Recent reports are suggesting that you're the next one in the line under the DMA legislation is charging Apple. Can you comment on that?
Well, we have a number of Apple issues. I find them very serious. I was very surprised that we would have such suspicions of Apple being non-compliant. But of course, it remains to be seen. But they are very important because a lot of good business happens through the App Store, happens through payment mechanisms. So, of course, even though, I can say this is not what was expected of such a company, of course, we will enforce exactly with the same dedication and with the same top priority as with any other business.
Soon?
Hopefully soon.
The reason why I'm also bringing up Apple is because companies such as Spotify have also raised issues with the new changes that Apple has put forward, that ultimately the bill that they would face now is the same or even bigger than what was in place before. And this is why I want to bring up the issue again of whether the DMA is actually leading to ultimate changes for the big tech. Or are they still hiding here in between some of within the law?
Well, I think that you cannot judge the DMA before we've had the cases and before we have finalized them, because we have a toolbox of fines, of doubling fines, of potential breakup of companies. So we have a very strong toolbox to punish. And now the investigations are ongoing. And one of the things we're looking at, of course, is that if a new setup of a fee structure is de facto preventing businesses from having the benefits of the Digital Markets Act. And I think it is very telling that what we see is sort of businesses trying to evade what is 100% legitimate. It is European legislation. You have a good business here, then you're supposed to live up to the legislation where you do your business. And I expected cases. I was a bit surprised that we would have so many cases so soon and more in the pipeline. But I think it comes from the fact that we're getting closer to the business model. And because of that, of course, also the potential for other businesses to be able to compete for that business is so much bigger. And that, of course, is very encouraging for someone who believes in competition. So
just to clarify, for those people that are worried about whether the Commission will enforce the DMA, your message is, yes, we'll be enforcing this.
Not only will we be enforcing it, it will be a top priority. Because the thing is that it's difficult to make good legislation, but if it's only on paper, you should have saved yourself the trouble. It's only when you enforce that you change the world, because only then do you change behavior.
That leads me to my next point, which is you basically have 4 months left in this mandate. What would be, after 10 years in this role, what would be your advice for the next person that comes and is in charge of competition policy?
Focus on getting the job done. Everything in this world that we live in is about speed. It will never be the same, because the ones who breaks the law, they have no obligations. Us who enforce the law, of course, we have obligations of due process, access to evidence, all of that. But that being said, focus on what is important, what has the strongest deterrence, the cases that will have the strongest effect. Because getting the job done, that is the most important thing that you can do.
What do you think is going to be the next challenge? Because earlier we were suggesting that we were commenting on how this second mandate was particularly difficult compared to the first one, with the pandemic, with the war and so on. Obviously, there are certain events that you cannot prepare for, but what would you say, what do you foresee as the next big challenge for whoever takes over competition policy?
Well, I think it's important to get back to what we call sort of normal state aid rules.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting what Letta has suggested to make, what you have spent previously as sort of part of what you should contribute to European spending. On some issues, could be cutting-edge innovation, could be other things. So there will be very interesting discussions in how to make sure that when we invest more strategically, maintain the level playing field and competition, because competition is what makes your strategic investment effective. And we should never forget that the taxpayers who pay this, they get up every morning and they pay their taxes and they expect that things are done wisely.
Before we conclude our conversation, I have to ask you, any idea of what you might do next once you finish your mandate here?
Well, I may sleep for a month or so,
Fair.
because this has been 10 years hypercharged. But other than that, the chances of a new mandate they're very, very, very slim. So I'm kind of looking forward to a new chapter.
Let's see. We'll keep an eye on that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure.
That was our conversation with the Executive Vice President for the European Commission, Margrethe Vestager. And of course, a very important message there, Steve and Karen, that the EU needs to be more strategic with their investments if they want to compete on a global level.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to CNBC.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.